What's going on guys, Matthias here and welcome to this video. Today I wanted to try something different, and what I was thinking was to actually read a book for you guys. We'll read some stories, because this book called True Ghost Stories from World War I and World War II, if you guys can see it. It is in English as well, so I don't have to translate it in my head before I can actually say it. So that's perfect. Yeah. There's some fucking disgusting old spider legs on the top of it. Fuck off. God, that was gross. I don't want to touch them. But yeah, they're gone now. Anyway, I will be reading some stories here, and it's some pretty small ones. This one is called Guided Through a Minefield by Anthony Hayes, and these stories are supposedly true, actually. So yeah, we'll just do it. Death awaited on all sides, but the ethereal form of Anne Bronte materialized to guide young Tony to safety. Behind this wall lies the mortal remains of Anne Bronte, beloved sister of Charlotte and Emily Bronte. The rest of the wording on the plaque escapes my memory, as it has been more than 20 years since I read this marble epitaph, built in the old red brick wall of St. Mary's Church in Scarborough. It was here I lived in my childhood, and I still can see in my mind's eye the narrow road winding down from the ruins of the castle, perched high on the hilltop beside the North Sea, overlooking the town. The old drinking well halfway down the hill has quenched many a thirst with its iron cup, chained to the grey rocky structure beside the iron red streak in the stone which it had painted there. When I drank from this cup as a child, I always remembered the Roundheads who had slaked their thirst from this very well and cup when they came in the long ago to wage war against the castle which still shadowed the house where I lived. That's actually how it's written. I think it's really old. I think this is supposedly from the 40s, and I think it's there's supposedly handwritten stories that some people have actually sent in, and then they've put them in this. Of course, they're not handwritten here. They're actually, but they're just written here. And I've noticed there's a few spelling mistakes and spelling errors, and some of the words I don't know how to really pronounce the right way. So bear with me on that one. Sorry, I'll go back to the story. We lived at the bottom of the hill. The road slanted uphill for perhaps half a mile past the churchyard before it forked downhill into the town. We were at the bottom of the hill, opposite the church. The Bronte plaque in the church wall marked the meeting place for me and my friends. When I was about 14, the war meant little to me. My friends and I played for hours in the churchyard, jumping from grave to grave, in our own game of hopscotch. The large slabs of granite had long since been eroded smooth by time, so that it took the sharpest eye to see who had been buried there. In this ancient churchyard, headstones under 100 years old were looked upon as newcomers. We played, jumped, and hid in the tall grass and behind the headstones. There were no flowers, no visitors ever came. When the graveyard gets very old, no one comes, no one except the children. But in the spring of 1941, I suddenly felt the full impact of the war. It happened when we were going home from school, the long way, that is, down the beach, over the rocks and around the headland. The light was going fast. The tide was coming in faster. My two companions, Peter McLean and John Early, turned back, calling me to join them. But I shouted I was going to make it. Suddenly I was alone, raising the tide and the darkness to the headland. Then, in what little light remained, I saw a sign stuck in the sand. I felt weak when I read it. Its legend was simple. Minefield, it said. But I had no choice. I had passed the point of no return. If I turned back, I faced being swept out to sea by the spring tides. If I went on, I took my chance in the minefield. But at least it was a chance. Minefields were new to me, but I had lived all my life beside the sea and learned to respect it. I headed into the minefield. I still remember how I felt at that moment. It wasn't exactly fear so much as just wanting to get home. I felt detached as I walked on into the area. Automatically, I stepped lightly, looking at the sand for any indications that might serve as a warning. But I could see nothing out of the ordinary. And it was getting darker and colder. There were no lights to be seen anywhere. A strict blackout was enforced in Britain during the war. Time dragged, and it seemed to me I had been walking for hours, when in fact I only had progressed a few feet. I heard the sound of the surf breaking on the rocks not far behind me. Ahead of me stretched a slight rise of about 200 feet of sand to the bottom of the cliff I intended to climb. Once at the top of the cliff, across the field to the road, and I would be almost home. The cliff was 50 feet straight up, but that didn't bother me. I could climb it blindfolded. It was the 200 feet of open ground to the foot of the cliff that gave me a prickly feeling, knowing that there, freshly laid landmines waited for me to make one wrong step. Suddenly, I became aware of a faint light, or perhaps I should call it a glow, right ahead of me. I couldn't understand why it would be there. I called out. There was no answer, except in the rising wind which was moaning through the outcrops of the cliff overhead. But the glow remained, and I moved toward it. As I approached, it did not change in size or intensity. Then suddenly it moved slightly to the left. I followed. Then it went to the right, then a little to the left, and back half a step to the right. I followed as if I were following a torch beam on the ground ahead of me. How many lefts and rights the light made, I have no idea, but in no time I found myself at the foot of the cliff. I had made it through the minefield, lit by the light. I looked back before I started the climb. The light still glowed, but I swear, it had changed a little. It took on the shape of a lady who stood pointing toward the top of the cliff. She looked different from the ladies I was accustomed to seeing. She looked old-fashioned. I had not had the time to look any longer. I started to climb. Halfway up the cliff face, I stopped again to look. I started to climb. Halfway up the cliff face, I stopped again to look back at the beach below me. There was nothing there except blackness and the swirling sea smashing on the rocks as the tide fast approached the bottom of the cliff I was climbing. The glow, the lady, was gone. I climbed onto safety. I told no one of my experiences for two reasons. First, I would have received a hiding for doing what I did. Second, had I told of being led safely through the minefield by a glow, I would have been laughed at. So I said nothing of my narrow escape. The war continued. We moved to another town, a city 80 miles inland, because of my father's work. I continued my studies as usual. One day we were discussing English literature in class, and the talk came around the Bronte sisters. The teacher told us about the desolate existence in the Yorkshire moors in the small village of Haveth, and about their love of writing. He passed the book around, showing a picture of the three sisters. I could hardly believe what I saw. One of the girls in the picture was the lady of the light of the glow that had led me safely through the minefield. Here was the same old-fashioned clothing, Anne Bronte, the same person at whose gravestone my friends and I had met, at whose nameplate we had lingered to talk, had been the light. I passed the book to the next person, to the person next to me. It went from hand to hand as I sat transfixed. A few years later, before going overseas with the British Army, I had reason to stop in Scarborough, my old hometown. I went to have another look at the wall and the plaque at St. Mary's. Everything looked the same. I stood for a moment or two, looking at the words on the white marble plaque, behind this wall, so on. Gratefully remembered a brief time when Anne Bronte had seemed not to be behind this wall. There was a few mistakes for me in the end there, because some of the words were misspelled, so it was a little bit hard to read for a second. But yeah, well, that was a cool little story. It wasn't necessarily scary, except for the fact that he was in a minefield. But other than that, it wasn't really. Damn it! It wasn't really scary. It was just more cool than anything, honestly. Anyway, this is a very short story. It's not even an entire page long. It's this one over here. It only goes down to here. It's called I Am Whole, by E. Parsons. My husband, Captain Dennis John Parsons, was a pilot during the war and after. On March 12, 1950, he was killed when his plane crashed while circling to land at Llandough Airfield, Wales. I was so filled with grief that I knew no rest. Life, I felt, had become empty and meaningless. The picture of the broken bodies and scattered luggage of those who had died so violently in the crash haunted me. The scene lived with me until I felt that only death could release me from the horror of it. A month after the tragedy, I was sitting before a dying fire which left the room practically in darkness. I heard footsteps, the rattle of a key in a lock. How could that be? The door was locked and bolted. Petrified, I heard the door open and close. The kitchen wall blocked my view, but I heard the steps coming towards me. Too stunned to move or to cry out, I sat paralyzed. Then I saw my husband before me. His tweed sport coat and brown trousers were familiar to my amazed eyes. He smiled and said, "You can see that I am whole, my body complete. Try to forget what happened. I was allowed to come back to set your mind at rest." As suddenly as if a light had been turned out, he vanished. My terror left me and I cried out, thinking I could call him back. He was gone, but for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. I relaxed in my chair and soon I slept. My last waking thought was, he is whole in body, as are the others. After this mental picture of the crash no longer haunted me, I realized that a spiritual life exists for everyone. By Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. This other one is about 1.5 pages, and it's called Hand on My Head, by Chester E. Hall. The first of 7 times I cheated death was during the war to end all wars, aka the First World War. On July 14th, 1918 at 12:10 a.m. We of the Rainbow Light Field Artillery were in sacrifice position near Chalon-sur-Marne, off the Sipay Road, in an abandoned trench system. I'm sorry if I butchered any of those names, but I don't speak French. Anyway, we were to hold down the German attack, which was known to be due through the daring and heroic efforts of several French officers and one private who had penetrated deep inside German lines and fought their way back with stormtroopers as prisoners. These prisoners broke and gave valuable information. Okay. As corporal in the horse section of light artillery, it was my duty to bring up ammunition. At 11:30 p.m, it was found we did not have sufficient, so I had to mount up and go get 10 caissons full of shells, just like that. Go get them. Where? Oh, back there. Really, it is not more difficult to buy mink coats at Woolworths with Confederate $10 bills than to convince the guard at an ammo dump, wherever you find one, that you are who you say you are, and Colonel so-and-so said, get shells. But we got a load, 10 caissons. Then we got lost, and somewhere in the dark we passed the German infantry moving up. We whispered, we get, and swallowed hard. The many answers to our greetings were kept still. Turned around and at 3:45 p.m. pulled into the regiment. By this time, tempers were short, and those fortunate not to have drawn this detail were tucked into their foxholes. We had no holes, and the German artillery fire was searching every gully, road and inch of ground that 4 years of fighting along the same line had taught them existed. My assistant stumbled over some bales of hay and sacks of oats left by the supply regiment for our horses. We piled this up as a barricade and lay down behind it. At least it provided some shelter from a direct hit. The fear was draining out of our throats somewhat by this time, and decided we could grab a few moments of precious sleep. I took off my pistol belt, which was loaded with 2 canteens, one extra in case, a first aid box, cartridges, and a haversack. All this just did not allow one to assume a prone position. As I bent forward to put the heavy belt on the hay, I felt a hand on my head. This hand pushed me down so hard the rim of my helmet went more than an inch into the hard chalk soil. And at that exact moment, a shell tore through my service belt, cut the handle off my .45, took one canteen away with it, and exploded a few yards behind us. If that hand of force, or you name it, had not pushed me very forcibly down, my head would have been completely severed from my body. When I got my heart back down out of my mouth and could talk, I turned to thank my assistant. To my surprise, he was not there. He told me later he had gone to tie up a loose horse and then couldn't bear to come back, for he had seen the shell explode and he was sure I was dead. Damn. Los Angeles, California. Holy shit. These are some really cool stories. They're so cool. I love this. This one is called Off We Go Into the Wild Blue Yonder by Colonel Laura L. Smith. Laughter and idle prattle were coming from the dining room. A 3-year-old blonde girl was under the cherry dining room table, chattering presumably to the doll she was playing with. Her mother peeked into the room to make sure everything was all right, and then went about her house cleaning. Time passed, and now the 5-year-old girl was looking in an old family picture album with her mother. She pointed to a picture of a military man and said, "That is my friend. He plays games with me and sings to me at night." Her mother gasped in surprise. "He has fun, shiny things all over his jacket," continued the child. Air Force 2nd Lieutenant Bill Jacobson had impacted wisdom teeth. He didn't have to go on the mission that fateful day, October 14th, 1944. However, feeling he had to go for his crew, he climbed into the pilot's seat of the B-24 bomber. The young pilot vowed to his wife, wife before he left that he would always look out for her. 2 hours later, over Yugoslavia, the B-24 was shot out of the sky by anti-aircraft fire. As the crew descended through the clouds in their parachutes, the Germans shot at them and Bill was killed. Got hair in my mouth. The surviving crew members were captured and spent the remainder of the war in a German prisoner of war camp. When Bill died, he was listed as missing in action. Eventually, his serviceman group life insurance went into effect, and his widow received $55 a month until his $10,000 life insurance was paid out. The benefit was a pittance for the life of a husband. Eventually, the wife remarried, but that marriage ended in divorce. The second marriage produced a daughter, the blonde girl, who was me, of course. Could I indeed have been sung to and entertained by an Air Force pilot killed in World War II? This story was part of our family's oral history until 1985. As the years progressed, Mother started having financial problems because of ill health. She stopped working and was living with me. At the time, I was a captain in the Air Force Reserves. One day I noticed a brief item in the US News and World Report. Widows of servicemen killed on active duty who remarried and divorced are eligible for death indemnity compensation from a Veterans Administration. "Hey Mom, look at this," I said excitedly. Mother read the item. "Oh, World War II was so long ago. That cannot possibly apply to me," she sighed. "Anyhow, the Veterans Administration said Bill's records were destroyed, so I couldn't document his service anyway." After much cajoling, I talked to my mother into going down to the Veterans Administration office and filing for the benefit. When Mother received compensation months later, she and I both wondered if Bill Jacobson had somehow put that item in the magazine from beyond the grave. I'm not knowingly sung to anymore by the deceased B-24 pilot, but during my promotion ceremony to colonel, I thought to myself, he vowed to take care of my mother. I wonder if he's here. I saluted as the Air Force song played in the background. Colonel Laura L. Smith, USAF, retired, Savannah, Georgia. These are some really cool stories. But this one wasn't necessarily scary, it was just cool. Like, of course, sad that the guy died, but it's still cool that he looked after the mother, or like his old wife, and a kid that wasn't even his. That's really cool, in a way. I don't personally believe in ghosts, but these stories are fascinating. And it's just heartwarming that this ghost looked after his wife's kid that he got, that she got with someone else. That's just admiring, like admiring. That's admirable. This one is kinda weird. It's like not even a page long, but it's really weird because I don't really understand how it has anything to do with ghosts, but whatever. It's called The Red Ball, and it's by Alex Flores. I would like to share a frightening experience that my mother told me about from when she was younger. During World War II, she, like many other young women, worked in the shipyards in Point Richmond, California. One night, coming home from work, my mother and her sister dropped off a co-worker who lived down the street. The time was around midnight. The co-worker asked them to please wait until his wife put the house light on and opened the door. Noticing the fear in his eyes, they asked him what he was afraid of. "It," he said. "I've seen it come across the field next to my house. Always at night. Look, here it comes." His eyes widened in fear. There was not a sound after that. You could have heard a pin drop. As my mother looked across the field, she saw what looked like a small ball rolling very fast towards them. As it approached, it kept getting bigger and bigger. It looked like a tumbleweed made out of fire, yet they could see through it. The thing was red in colour, like fire, except for two black eyes in the middle of it. By the time it crossed the field, it had grown to 7 or 8 feet tall. My mother began to pray for a miracle. She believed everyone in the car was going to be killed. Just before it crossed the street, an old truck came down the road, making lots of noise and backfiring as it came. The red thing stopped and started to go backwards very fast, getting smaller as it went back across the field into the night. I often wonder, could it still be out there at night, taking any poor soul it happens to meet? Let's pray not. Alex Flores, Santa Clara, California. I don't really understand this one. I know it's during the war, but I don't really understood that story, but fuck it. It's a cool story anyway, I like it. Okay. One more story, and we'll call it a day for now, and I'll make another video soon. The Three Nuns by Dominic P. Sunday. It was March 1945, and our unit was moving eastward towards Berlin. We had crossed the Rhine and moved into a small village before daylight. Our party consisted of a light truck and a few jeeps. We were a reconnaissance unit, not equipped with heavy arms. We stopped at the edge of a small village. We could hear small arms fire at the other end of the town. My job was to keep radio contact with the rest of our unit, so I stayed near my radio vehicle as several of my mates moved carefully up the main street. I could see with my binoculars that the street was clear. For some reason I still don't understand, there seemed to be a lull in the firing. 3 dark figures were slowly coming up the street. I watched them come right up to the side of my truck and continue on past me. The 3 figures were tall and gaunt looking, their faces lined in grey. Their habits were black and their headdress was similar to that worn by my junior school nuns. I looked down at their black high-topped shoes that seemed to glide over the rough cobblestones. They were expressionless, as if were not concerned with the small arms battle that went on. After they passed, the firing resumed as before. Frank, a corporal who returned from his walk to the other end of the town, asked me if any of the enemy troops had come my way. I told him that only the nuns had come past my position, and that the firing had stopped, then started up again after they had passed. He looked at me as if I was crazy. He assured me that the firing never stopped, and it was impossible for 3 nuns to walk down the street without getting caught in the line of fire. After the firing stopped, I drove the full length of the town. I expected to see a church or a school that would be a place for nuns to be. I carefully noted all the main street businesses and residences without a sign of a church or any school building. My friend Frank thought I had lost my mind for thinking that the firing had stopped. According to him, our infantry platoon kept firing until the enemy left town and retreated into a wood at the edge of town. The slow walk the elderly nuns took was only possible if there was a rift in time to allow them to escape harm. I'm sure the delay in the firing was just long enough for this to happen. I'm convinced that the nuns were not real at the time of the incident. After all, their feet were never on the ground. They seemed to float a few inches above the cobblestones. They might have been from a distant war in the past, not in 1945. Dominic P. Sunday and Muskegon, Michigan. That is it for this video right now, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed what you saw here. If you did, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, share with friends and family, and let me know if you want to hear more ghost stories. There is still a shit ton left in this book. We've only read these few ones. There is still so many left. So if you guys would like to see more of this, let me know by hitting the like button, subscribe, and share so more people can see this. And yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I can't wait to do more of this because I love reading these stories. They're so cool. Like some of them, or most of them, are probably just made up stories because I don't believe in ghosts. So I'm skeptical about it. They're cool, but I don't really believe in it myself. But it's still an interesting subject to look into, especially because it has to do with two other things I know a lot about. Look at that and that. And I also have a video showing off my collection of historical items and just museum in general. Museum, I call it, because I have some things I would assume would be in a museum. So, yeah. And some of them I actually got from a museum because I bought them from the museum because they had some duplicates of them and they were like, fuck it, we don't want it ourselves, so you fucking buy it or whatnot. So, yeah. But again, thank you guys so much for watching. It's been a pleasure. I'll see you all very soon. Peace.